Chapter 15 of Armand Durand by Rosanna Leprohon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. It cannot be said that our hero was either as studious or as apt as he had been before his unfortunate marriage. He certainly was not. Who could tell the bright dreams and illusions he had had then to spur him on to exertion? Now it was all narrowed down to a mere strife for daily bread, without one gleam of hope in the future, one ray of joy in the present. More than once Mr. Laez had entered the office unexpectedly, and found his student buried in moody reverie, whilst piles of papers to be sorted or copied lay untouched on the desk before him. The lawyer, however, had heard something of Armand's troubles, so he was considerate and merciful, knowing that the young man's rare abilities would enable him later to make up for the time he was now losing. Slowly, wearily to Durand dragged on the tedious winter, with its short days and long, interminable evenings. No pleasant social entertainments, no quiet fireside hours to gild its course. In the domestic circle matters were growing worse instead of better. Mrs. Martel's vituperativeness and Delima's ill humour but increased in proportion as they ascertained more thoroughly each day the invincible patience of their victim, who, despite of all, however, remained firm to his resolve of not applying for money to either friend or relative. But there is such a thing as straining a bow too tight, as filling a cup too full, and this Mrs. Martel was destined to find from her own experience. As Armand, after a hasty dinner, was preparing to leave for the office, Delima pettishly informed him she wanted money badly. He instantly drew his slenderly filled purse from his pocket and gave it to her. "'Tis all I will have, Delima, till next month, but you are welcome to it." The young wife opened it and scattered the trifling contents contemptuously on the table before her. "That is of no use," she pouted. "But what do you specially want just now?" "Firstly, a new coat for yourself. Yours is disgracefully shabby." "Oh, is that all?" he interrupted. "Thanks, mine will do well enough for this winter." "Then if your coat will do, my worn old furs won't. They look perfectly disgraceful beside my fine new cloak." "Yes, that they do," chimed in Mrs. Martel. "For a bride, too, they look doubly bad." "I am sorry for it, but I fear you will have to take this season out of them." "That she won't, Mr. Durand," interrupted the hostess. "What business had you to take a wife if you can't dress her decently?" "You forget you forced me to, in spite of myself," retorted Durand, who felt in an unusually irritable frame of mind. "Yes, I can testify to the truth of that," added Mr. Martel, sotto voce, "just as I was married myself." With angry countenance his wife turned on the speaker, but the latter prudently left the battleground at once. "All this is not answering my question," interrupted the young bride. "I have answered it already. I've no more money to give you at present." "Yes, plenty, if your pride would allow you to ask your rich relations, but rather than do that, you choose to live on charity." Armand's cheek flushed deeply. "How is that, Mrs. Martel? Do I not pay you regularly the sum you fixed yourself as the price of my own and wife's board?" "Bah! A sum that does not half cover the expenses. However, if you won't write, I will, and I'll tell your Aunt Francoise, your brother Paul, and perhaps too your former proud lady-love, the stiff-necked Miss de Beauvoir, how poor and miserably off your wretched wife is." "You had better not do it, Mrs. Martel," rejoined Armand, with an unwonted look in his eyes, which should have warned that sharp-witted matron she was going too far. Without noting it, however, and approaching still nearer, she stared defiantly at him, reiterating, "But I will do it. I'll not allow me nor mine to know want, when the scratch of a pen will bring them plenty. No poor proud beggar shall impose on us, or if we have to put up with such a thing, the world shall at least know it." Suddenly yielding to one of the gusts of passion which, notwithstanding the gentleness of his disposition, at rare intervals swept over him, Armand suddenly turned upon his portly opponent, and seizing her by the shoulder, hurled her through the open door with a force that sent her crashing amongst the geranium pots, which came down with herself in one confused heap. "Now, Delima, you will pack up your clothes without delay, and be prepared to leave this house in an hour." "But she shan't go with you, you monster!" exclaimed Mrs. Martel, rising from the debris of broken pots, plants, and earth. "You would kill her as you nearly killed me just now." "You hear me, Delima," said our hero with stern calmness. "No, I will not go with you," hysterically sobbed the young wife. "As you will," was the indifferent reply. "I have no intention of insisting on my rights," and he quietly left the room and passed into his own. At once he entered on the toils of packing up, which with him was the very simple process of thrusting into his trunks clothes, books, brushes, in the order they came to hand. At the end of a half hour his task was complete. Then he suddenly remembered that at the commencement of the late stormy interview he had given his purse to Delima. What was he to do? Fortunately, he had a few dollars put up to pay an account for some law book lately purchased, and knowing the bookseller would wait, he resolved on appropriating it to present use. He glanced at his watch. 3/4 of an hour had elapsed already. Well, he would wait 1 hour, as he had told his wife, and at the expiration of that time he would leave. If she chose to accompany him, he was satisfied. If she decided on remaining, he would not say a word to dissuade her from it. Again another look at his timepiece. 4, 3, 2 minutes. The hour was up, and he took his cap, when the door slowly opened, and his wife, flushed and tearful, entered. "Are you coming with me, Delima?" "Yes." "Dress then quickly, for we have no time to lose. I will go for a carriole." "Where are we to go to?" she sobbed, completely subdued and sinking helplessly into a chair. "Do not be anxious. We can easily obtain comfortable lodgings for the price we pay here. I have a respectable quiet house in view at which I will make arrangements at once, and then return for you. It will give you a little time to pack up your ribbons and flowers." On his way out he saw no signs of Mrs. Martel, but he encountered her husband, who had been instructed to waylay Armand and win him over, if possible, to friendlier feelings. "Why, how is this, Armand? You are not really going to leave us?" "Yes, Mr. Martel, and I deeply regret it is under such unpleasant circumstances." "Take a little time, Armand, to decide. Do not leave immediately." "Nothing would induce me to remain even a night longer." "Allons, allons, what signify a few hot words more or less? My wife is already sorry for the past, and willing to make friends, if you'll consent." "I have no objection to the latter proposition, and I am exceedingly sorry myself for the violence I displayed during the dispute, but my mind is irrevocably made up." "Nor am I surprised at it," ejaculated Martel, treacherously going over to the enemy. "You have suffered a great deal, and now that you have thrown off your chains, I cannot wonder at your not wishing to put them on again. You frightened the bonne femme thoroughly, but as you fortunately did not hurt her, I bear you no malice. She said she thought all along that you had the heart of a mouse, but she finds instead you have that of a lion." "I disclaim the compliment if it is intended as one, and feel heartily ashamed of my exhibition of lion-heartedness. But time presses, I must be off. Before leaving, however, I must thank you, Mr. Martel, heartily and sincerely for the kindness you have invariably shown me during my stay under your roof." Andre coughed, and his voice was somewhat unsteady as he rejoined, "God bless you, Armand. From first to last you have acted as a true gentleman. I hope little Delima may prove worthy of you." Within an hour Durand returned for his wife, and, drowned in tears, she stepped into the sleigh without uttering a word, having already made her adieus to the family. Arrived at their new residence, which seemed both orderly and comfortable, Armand proceeded to take possession of their small though neat apartment by unpacking and hanging up his clothes, placing his books and papers in their respective places. Delima, meanwhile, sat disconsolately on a trunk, breaking forth every now and then into a fresh outburst of weeping. When the tea bell rang, she indignantly declined that refreshment, so Armand went down alone. The meal was certainly a great improvement on the niggardly repasts spread before him of late, and the reflection a pleasant one that henceforth they could be taken in peace, without a running accompaniment of reproaches and recriminations. There were but 4 other boarders, 2 old maiden sisters, neat in dress and prim in speech, and a quiet, middle-aged married couple, with whom, however, and the chatty, smiling hostess, a sufficiently lively conversation was kept up. When Armand returned to his own room, he found it somewhat cheerless, the fire having gone down. Delima had cried herself asleep in an easy chair, and as the rays of the candle beside her streamed full on her pale, tear-stained face, his heart smote him, despite the constant provocation and annoyance he received from her. She looked so young, so fragile, and now she was so utterly dependent on him. He quickly started the fire again, sought out the hostess to ask that a cup of tea might be sent up to Mrs. Durand as she was ill, a request willingly acceded to, and then returned to awake his wife. She again refused the proposed refreshment after it had been brought to her, and renewed her sobbing, interspersed with passionate grievings over her own sad fate and desolate condition. After a few words of unavailing consolation, the lamentations meanwhile redoubling, he gravely said, "If you are so utterly wretched, Delima, I see but one alternative. You must return to Mrs. Martel's, where apparently you can alone be happy. I will give as much as I can possibly afford towards your support, increasing the sum when I will be able. It is too late now, but tomorrow morning you can leave this." "I will do no such thing," interrupted the fair bride with much vivacity, "though I suppose you would be well pleased if I did, finding it probably a good riddance." Stung to energy by this thought, she sprang to her feet and commenced arranging her disordered toilette and sorting out what few articles of clothing she had brought with her, Mrs. Martel having promised that the remainder should be ready when sent for. When the bridegroom returned the following day from the office, he was agreeably surprised to find his fairer half seated at her sewing in the little drawing room, and engaged in pleasant chat with one of the lady boarders. He was further gratified by her whispered assurance that she felt happier and more comfortable than at Mrs. Martel's abode. Now, had Armand Durand possessed a little more determination of character, had he been able to follow up his signal domestic victory by a certain firmness of manner and purpose, all might yet have gone on tolerably well. But unfortunately such was not the case, and when, after a time, Mrs. Martel became a frequent caller at their present residence, and Delima passed a great portion of her time in reciprocating these visits, he never interfered. The moral results of this intercourse were plainly perceptible in the growing independence and exacting character of the young wife, who seemed to think the chief aim of existence now was to dress herself as elaborately and extravagantly as possible. Armand, on his side, drudged on perseveringly at his office duties, though at times with a feeling of dreary discouragement he could scarcely combat. No farther intercourse had passed between himself and Paul, subsequently to his returning to the latter his epistle containing an offer of money. But at New Year's a brief letter came to him from Tante Ratelle, in which was enclosed a present of £50. There was no mention of the bride in this missive, nor any wish, however faintly expressed, to make her acquaintance. Unfortunately, Mrs. Ratelle had heard from good authority a very accurate description of her character, and learned thus how poor, how utterly worthless was the prize for which her ill-starred nephew had paid such a price. The £50 was soon coaxed from him, and instead of being devoted, at least in part, to the liquidation of some debts contracted by the young couple, was laid out in the purchase of a new set of furs for Delima and a suit of outdoor costume, rivaling in elegance the toilettes of Miss de Beauvoir herself. Mrs. Martel was not forgotten in this unequal partition of Aunt Ratelle's New Year's gift, and a handsome new cloak out of it fell to her share. The lapse of a few months found the bride, who had been so much enchanted at first with boarding-house life, utterly tired of it. The boarders were so ill-natured and sarcastic to her, the landlady so rude and disagreeable, that she scarcely dared to ask for a glass of water between meals, and she herself so tired of being obliged to always eat, sit, and live under the constant supervision of strangers, that she had come to the conclusion she would rather starve in a little home of her own, even a garret, than remain where she was at present. Of course, Mrs. Martel was at the bottom of all this repining and discontent. That wily mischief-maker found she had but very little comfort or liberty in her visits to the young wife. There was no possibility of cosy tea-drinkings, or long pleasant evenings crowned by a hot supper. In short, Delima might as well be in Saint Laurent for all the comfort or profit there was now in her society. Prompted by such ill-judged innuendos and advice, young Mrs. Durand soon made herself intensely disagreeable to her fellow boarders, and her affectation and airs of superiority were resented with considerable warmth. Every evening, when our hero returned from the office, there was a fresh grievance to relate, a new tale of oppression and unkindness to impart, till he began insensibly to dread his return to his present abode, almost as much as he had once done that to Mrs. Martel's hospitable domicile. Delima would vary the tale at other times by dwelling on the happiness they would enjoy in a home of their own, no matter how humble, and on the economy and housekeeping ability she would display in the administration of said home. The picture was tempting, and Armand often found himself wondering how it could be accomplished, and if his independence and pride would ever allow him to solicit his Aunt Ratelle's aid in bringing it about. Destiny settled the matter by favoring him with an accidental meeting with Tante Francoise, who had come to town for the first time since the death of her brother Paul Durand. Armand, his young wife leaning on his arm, met her face to face as she was coming out of one of the low-browed, dingy shops of which many still characterized Montreal at that period. Remembering all her former kindness, the young man was really overjoyed by the meeting, and plainly evinced by look and word the pleasure he felt. Mrs. Ratelle's first coldness soon thawed under the subtle charm of Armand's affectionate greeting, and, to pressing solicitations of the young couple that she would return with them and partake of their present landlady's hospitality, she returned an answer in the negative, but counterbalanced her refusal by inviting them to dine with her in the quiet, respectable hotel where she put up. The invitation was at once accepted, and the banquet came off triumphantly. True, Mrs. Ratelle viewed with considerable disfavor the costly furs and elegant mantle adorning the wife of a poor law student, but Delima looked so very young and lovely, and rendered herself so charming, resuming for that purpose the gentle, coaxing ways which had characterized her before marriage, that Tante Francoise felt the prejudices she had conceived against her fast wearing away. With an openness which the elder lady rather appreciated than otherwise, the bride enlarged on her ardent desire to be in a home of her own, not forgetting to indulge at the same time in one of her usual brilliant dreams of faultless housekeeping. "But, child," exclaimed Aunt Ratelle, dryly, in answer to this latter rhapsody, "I cannot imagine so finely dressed a lady as you are, looking after pots and pans, pickles and preserves. You would do better in a salon." "Ah, Tante Francoise," rejoined Delima, adopting at once the title by which Armand addressed his aunt, "I dress so finely because I have nothing else to do. If I had a little home of my own, how different it would be! I would have something more useful to think of than finery." Mrs. Ratelle said no more on the subject, and when the young couple took leave, she asked her nephew to return in the evening to have a talk with her. Of course he willingly complied, and the night was far advanced when the conference came to an end. Much had they to speak of, but through the course of that long conversation the young man was wonderfully reticent on the subject of his own domestic annoyances, as well as on the manoeuvring that had been employed to bring about his marriage. Amongst other items of home news, Mrs. Ratelle told him that Paul remained always quietly in the old homestead, but had grown unusually gloomy and taciturn, whilst his interest in agriculture and farming had considerably diminished. He seemed to have no thought of matrimony, though, if so disposed, he could have his choice among some of the prettiest girls in Allenville. He never mentioned Armand's name, nor alluded in any manner to the events that had transpired at the time of their father's death, though she suspected he brooded the more deeply over them for all that, turning, probably for consolation, to stimulants with a frequency that filled her with anxiety and misgiving. Then Mrs. Ratelle spoke of our hero's affairs, and asked him if he desired, as much as his wife, to have a fireside of his own. Remembering the tiresome complaints and tirades inflicted on him every evening by Delima, he heartily answered in the affirmative. His reply evidently found favor in the eyes of Tante Francoise, who secretly feared that the present inactive life the bride was leading might inoculate her with idle, extravagant ideas, and render her unfit at a later period for assuming the management of a household. The end of all this was that Armand was to be put in immediate possession of the legacy left her by his father, a portion of which, wisely invested, would ensure a reasonable annual interest, whilst a sufficient sum could be deducted to set up housekeeping at once, though on the smallest possible scale. "I hope, nephew, our decision has been a prudent one," said Aunt Ratelle impressively. "Some might say that it would have been wiser to have left things as they were, but you are now a married man, surely fit to be trusted with the direction of your own affairs. Two qualities are eminently necessary for you: economy and firmness. See that you fail in neither." End of chapter 15.